It was a typical Tuesday morning at the downtown courthouse, and Officer Derek Rodriguez had just finished his third cup of coffee. He checked his watch, still 20 minutes before he had to testify in that speeding ticket case. The hallways were buzzing with lawyers, defendants, and court staff hurrying between courtrooms. Derek straightened his uniform and looked around. He loved moments like these when people noticed his badge and showed him respect. After 10 years on the force, he still got a kick out of the authority his uniform commanded. Some of his fellow officers called him old school, but Derek believed in maintaining order and keeping people in their place. The marble hallway echoed with footsteps and hushed conversations. Derek found a spot near the water fountain where he could people watch while waiting. That's when he first saw her, a well-dressed black woman in an expensive navy blue suit, carrying a leather briefcase and talking quietly on her phone. She looked professional, but Derek's mind immediately jumped to assumptions. Probably another public defender, he thought to himself. These lawyers always acted like they owned the place. He watched as she balanced her phone between her shoulder and ear while trying to organize a stack of legal documents. The woman was clearly having an important conversation. Her voice was calm and authoritative, discussing something about budget allocations and policy changes. But Derek wasn't really listening to her words. He was too busy making judgments based on what he saw. As she moved through the busy hallway, other people seemed to notice her too. A few court clerks nodded respectfully as she passed. One of the bailiffs even stepped aside to give her more room. But Derek didn't pick up on these subtle signs of respect that others were showing her. The woman ended her phone call and started walking toward the same courtroom where Derek needed to testify. She had her hands full, briefcase in one hand, a thick folder of papers in the other, and her phone now tucked under her arm. The hallway was getting more crowded as another court session was about to begin. That's when it happened. As she navigated through the crowd, someone bumped into her from behind. The sudden push caused her to stumble slightly, and she accidentally brushed against Derek's arm as she tried to regain her balance. It was clearly an accident. Anyone could see that. The hallway was packed, and these things happened all the time in busy public buildings. A normal person would have smiled, maybe said, "Excuse me," and moved on with their day. But Derek wasn't feeling normal that morning. Maybe it was the extra caffeine, or maybe it was just his true nature finally showing through. Instead of being understanding, he felt his temper flare up immediately. "Watch where you're going," he snapped, his voice loud enough that several people nearby turned to look. The woman looked surprised but remained polite. "I'm sorry, officer. Someone pushed me from behind and I lost my balance for a moment." Her apology was genuine and respectful. She even called him officer, showing the exact kind of respect that Derek usually demanded. But something about her composed manner irritated him even more. Who did she think she was, talking to him like an equal? "Maybe you should pay more attention instead of trying to carry so much stuff you can't handle," Derek said, his voice dripping with disdain. The woman's expression shifted slightly. She wasn't angry, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she was used to dealing with difficult people. "You're absolutely right. I should be more careful in crowded spaces." Her calm response only made Derek angrier. He was used to people getting flustered when he used his authority voice. The fact that she remained so composed felt like a challenge to him. Other people in the hallway were starting to notice the interaction. A few lawyers had stopped their conversations to watch. Some court staff members were glancing over with concerned expressions. But Derek was too focused on his anger to notice the growing audience. That's when he made the decision that would change everything. As the woman bent down to pick up a pen that had fallen from her folder, Derek deliberately lifted his foot and kicked her briefcase, not hard enough to cause physical harm, but enough to send it flying across the marble floor. Legal documents scattered everywhere. Important papers that had been carefully organized were now spread across the dirty courthouse floor. The woman's phone clattered against the wall. Her folder split open, adding even more papers to the mess. The hallway went silent. Everyone stopped what they were doing to stare at what had just happened. Some people pulled out their phones, not quite believing what they had witnessed. "Now look what you've done," Derek said with a smirk. "Maybe next time you'll be more careful about getting in people's way." But he wasn't finished. As the woman knelt down to gather her scattered papers, Derek leaned down and said something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. His words were quiet, but not quiet enough. Several people heard exactly what he said, and their expressions showed their shock and disgust. The woman froze for just a moment when she heard his comment. Then, with incredible dignity, she continued collecting her papers. Her hands were steady, her face was calm, but there was something in her posture that suggested she was used to facing this kind of treatment. Other people started moving to help her. A young lawyer rushed over to gather some of the papers. A court clerk bent down to retrieve documents that had slid under a bench. Even some of the people who had been waiting for their own court cases stopped to assist. "Thank you all so much," the woman said quietly as people handed her the scattered documents. "I really appreciate your kindness." Derek watched this scene with growing irritation. He had expected her to be embarrassed, maybe even to apologize again. Instead, she was thanking people and acting like nothing had happened. The crowd that had gathered was clearly on her side, and some of them were looking at Derek with obvious disapproval. "Is everything all right here?" asked Bailiff Thompson, who had heard the commotion from his post near courtroom 3. "Just someone who needs to watch where they're walking," Derek replied, still trying to maintain his authority. But Bailiff Thompson had seen the whole thing. He had watched Derek deliberately kick the briefcase, and he had heard the inappropriate comment that followed. His expression showed exactly what he thought of Derek's behavior. The woman stood up, her papers now mostly gathered and organized again. She looked directly at Derek for the first time since the incident began. Her gaze was steady and calm, but there was something behind her eyes that Derek couldn't quite read. It wasn't anger or fear. It was something else entirely. "Officer Rodriguez," she said, reading his name tag. "I hope you have a good rest of your day." Then she walked away, her head held high, moving toward courtroom 3 with the same professional confidence she had shown before. Other people in the hallway watched her go, many of them still shaking their heads at what they had witnessed. Derek tried to act like nothing had happened, but he could feel people staring at him. Some were whispering to each other, and a few were still holding their phones. He suddenly realized that his moment of power had turned into something else entirely. He straightened his uniform again and tried to look official, but the damage was already done. In less than 5 minutes, Derek had revealed his true character to a hallway full of witnesses. And unknown to him, several of those witnesses had captured every moment on video. The woman disappeared into courtroom 3, and Derek headed toward his own testimony. He had no idea that he had just made the biggest mistake of his career, or that the composed woman he had just humiliated would soon become the most important person in his professional life. Derek finished his testimony and headed back to his patrol car, completely unaware that his life was about to change forever. He felt pretty good about himself, actually. The speeding ticket case had gone smoothly, and he had shown that woman at the courthouse who was in charge. Just another successful day on the job, he thought. Meanwhile, back at the courthouse, something was already happening that Derek couldn't have imagined. Lisa Chen, a court reporter who had witnessed the entire incident, was sitting in her car during lunch break, staring at her phone in disbelief. She had recorded the whole thing. At first, she wasn't even sure why she had started filming. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe something about Derek's aggressive behavior had told her this wasn't going to end well. Either way, she now had clear video footage of everything that had happened. Lisa watched the video again. There was Derek, clearly kicking the briefcase on purpose. There was the woman, maintaining her dignity while picking up scattered papers. And there was Derek's comment afterward, audible enough on the recording to make Lisa's stomach turn. She wasn't the only one who had filmed it. At least 3 other people had pulled out their phones during the incident. The courthouse had security cameras too, but those belonged to the system. These phone videos belonged to regular people who had seen something wrong and decided to document it. Lisa's hands shook slightly as she uploaded the video to her social media accounts. She wrote a simple caption. "This happened at our courthouse today. A police officer deliberately kicked a woman's briefcase and then said something I can't even repeat. This is not okay." Within minutes, her phone started buzzing with notifications, comments, shares, likes. They were coming in faster than she could read them. Her friends were shocked. Strangers were outraged. The video was being shared from account to account, spreading through the community like wildfire. But Lisa's video wasn't the only one making waves. Kevin Martinez, a law student who had been waiting for his internship interview, had also recorded the incident from a different angle. His video showed Derek's face clearly, along with his name tag and badge number. Kevin posted his footage with the hashtag #CourthouseShame, and it immediately started gaining traction. Then there was Mrs. Patricia Williams, a retired teacher who had been at the courthouse for jury duty. She had filmed the aftermath, capturing the woman's graceful response and the way other people had rushed to help her. Patricia's video focused on the kindness of the bystanders, but it also showed Derek's smug expression as he watched the scene unfold. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, all 3 videos had been combined and shared hundreds of times. The story was spreading beyond just friends and family. Local community groups were sharing it. Neighborhood watch pages were posting it. Even some news bloggers were starting to take notice. Derek was completely oblivious to all of this. He was back on patrol, eating a sandwich in his squad car and scrolling through sports news on his phone. He had no social media accounts of his own. He thought that stuff was for kids and attention seekers. If he had checked, he might have seen the storm clouds gathering, but other people were definitely checking. Captain Rodriguez, no relation to Derek, was in his office when his secretary knocked on the door with a worried expression. She was holding her phone, and the look on her face told him this wasn't good news. "Captain, you need to see this," she said, holding up her screen. "It's about one of our officers." Captain Rodriguez watched the videos with growing horror. He had been hoping to retire quietly in 2 years without any major scandals. Now he was looking at what could become the biggest public relations nightmare in the department's recent history. The phone calls started around 3 o'clock. First, it was the mayor's office, asking if the department was aware of the situation involving Officer Rodriguez. Then it was city council members wanting to know what actions were being taken. Local civil rights leaders began calling for immediate investigation. By 4 o'clock, the hashtag #CourthouseShame had been joined by Courthouse Racism and Justice for Courthouse Woman. The videos had been shared thousands of times across multiple platforms. Local news stations were starting to pick up the story for their evening broadcasts. Derek's shift was almost over when his radio crackled to life. "Unit 47, please return to station immediately for administrative meeting." Derek frowned. Administrative meetings usually meant paperwork or schedule changes. He couldn't think of anything he had done recently that would require immediate attention. He certainly had no idea that Captain Rodriguez was pacing in his office, fielding angry phone calls and trying to figure out how to handle the growing crisis. When Derek arrived at the station, he noticed something strange. Several of his fellow officers looked at him with expressions he couldn't quite read. Some seemed angry, others looked embarrassed. A few just shook their heads and walked away when they saw him coming. "Rodriguez, get in here now," Captain Rodriguez called from his office door. Derek walked in, still clueless about what was happening. The captain's desk was covered with printed emails, and his computer screen showed a social media page with Derek's photo prominently displayed. "Sit down, the captain said grimly. "We need to talk." That's when Derek saw the videos for the first time. His stomach dropped as he watched himself on the captain's computer screen, kicking the briefcase and making that comment he now desperately wished he could take back. "This is you, isn't it?" Captain Rodriguez asked, though they both knew the answer. Derek tried to explain. He talked about being bumped into, about the woman not watching where she was going, about maintaining respect for law enforcement. But even as the words came out of his mouth, he could hear how weak they sounded. The captain listened quietly, then turned his computer screen toward Derek. "Do you see these numbers? This video has been shared over 10,000 times in the last few hours. The news stations are calling, the mayor is calling, community leaders are demanding your badge." Derek's face went pale. He had never imagined that a moment of anger could spiral so completely out of control. "Captain, I can explain." "Explain what?" the captain interrupted. "Explain why you assaulted a citizen in a courthouse? Explain why you made inappropriate comments to a woman who was minding her own business? What exactly are you going to explain? The meeting didn't last long. Derek was immediately suspended pending a full investigation. He had to turn in his badge, his gun, and his radio. The desk sergeant, who had known Derek for years, couldn't even look at him as he processed the suspension paperwork. Outside the station, Derek sat in his personal car, trying to process what had just happened. His phone, which had been quiet all day, suddenly started buzzing with calls from unknown numbers. Reporters had somehow gotten his contact information. He drove home in a daze, still not fully understanding how quickly everything had changed. When he pulled into his driveway, his neighbor was standing outside holding his phone and looking at Derek with obvious disgust. "That's you in that video, isn't it?" the neighbor asked. "My wife showed it to me. That's really messed up, man." Derek hurried inside without answering, but he could feel eyes watching him from other houses on the street. Word was already spreading through his own neighborhood. His wife met him at the door with tears in her eyes and her phone in her hand. She had seen the videos too. Their teenage daughter was upstairs crying because her friends at school had already started sending her the footage with questions about her dad. The family Derek thought he was protecting with his tough guy attitude was now suffering because of his actions. The respect he thought he commanded through fear and authority was crumbling in real time, and somewhere out there, the woman he had humiliated was going about her day, probably unaware that justice was already beginning to catch up with the man who had wronged her. The videos continued spreading through the night, reaching new audiences, and sparking conversations about police behavior, respect, and human dignity. Derek's moment of cruelty had become a rallying cry for change, and there was no going back. 3 days after the courthouse incident, Derek woke up to the sound of protesters outside his house. He pulled back the bedroom curtain and saw about 20 people holding signs and chanting on the sidewalk. One sign read, "Fire Derek now," and another said, "Justice for all citizens." His stomach twisted as he realized his address had somehow been made public. His wife, Carmen, was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with her head in her hands. "The kids can't go to school today," she said quietly. "Isabella came home crying yesterday because someone spray-painted racist cop lives here on her locker." Derek felt his world crashing down around him. This wasn't supposed to happen to him. He was just doing his job, maintaining order, keeping people in line. How had everything gotten so out of control? Meanwhile, across town, Captain Rodriguez was having the worst week of his 30-year career. The police station looked like a fortress under siege. News vans lined the street. Reporters tried to interview anyone in uniform, and protesters had been gathering every day since the videos went viral. The captain's phone hadn't stopped ringing. Community leaders, city council members, the mayor's office, and even the governor's staff had all called demanding answers. The local chapter of the NAACP had organized a march for the weekend. The Hispanic Chamber of Commerce had issued a statement condemning Derek's actions. Even the police union was staying unusually quiet about defending him. "Sir, we have another problem," said Lieutenant Torres, Derek's immediate supervisor, as he knocked on the captain's office door. "3 more officers have requested transfers to other precincts. They say they don't want to be associated with this department anymore." Captain Rodriguez rubbed his temples. Good officers were abandoning ship because of Derek's stupidity. The department's reputation, built over decades, was being destroyed by one man's moment of cruelty. The investigation was moving quickly. Internal Affairs had interviewed everyone who was at the courthouse that day. The security footage from multiple angles left no room for doubt about what had happened. Derek's personnel file had been reviewed, and several previous complaints from citizens were being re-examined with fresh eyes. Detective Martinez had found a pattern that made everyone uncomfortable. Over the past 5 years, Derek had received 7 formal complaints from minority citizens about his behavior during traffic stops and other interactions. Each complaint had been investigated and dismissed, often with explanations like insufficient evidence or conflicting testimony. Now those old cases looked different. The courthouse incident had revealed Derek's true character, and it cast doubt on how fairly those previous complaints had been handled. The department was facing questions not just about Derek, but about their entire system for handling misconduct allegations. Derek's situation at home was getting worse every day. Carmen had taken time off work because reporters kept calling her office. Their teenage son, Luis, had gotten into a fight at school when someone called his father a racist. Their daughter Isabella was seeing a counselor because she couldn't sleep and was having panic attacks. "Maybe we should move," Carmen suggested one evening as they sat in their living room with the curtains drawn. "My sister says we could stay with her in Phoenix until this blows over." Derek wanted to be angry, to blame everyone else for what was happening to his family. But late at night when he couldn't sleep, he found himself watching those courthouse videos over and over again. Each time he saw something that made him more uncomfortable with his own behavior. The woman in the video never fought back. She never raised her voice. She just picked up her papers with dignity while he stood there smirking. Other people had rushed to help her, showing the kind of basic human decency that Derek had completely abandoned in that moment. At the police station, Captain Rodriguez was dealing with pressure from above and below. The mayor had called a meeting with the city council to discuss police reform initiatives. The police union was demanding that Derek receive due process, while community groups were calling for his immediate termination. "Captain, I've been thinking," said Sergeant Johnson, one of the department's most respected officers. "Maybe it's time for some of us older guys to step aside and let fresh leadership take over. This department needs a complete culture change." Captain Rodriguez knew what Johnson meant. The old guard, the officers who had looked the other way when guys like Derek crossed lines, were part of the problem. Change couldn't happen with the same leadership that had allowed these issues to fester for years. That afternoon, Captain Rodriguez made a decision that surprised everyone. He walked into the mayor's office and submitted his resignation, effective at the end of the month. He was only 55, still had years left in his career, but he knew the department needed a clean slate. "I take full responsibility for the culture that allowed Officer Rodriguez's behavior to continue unchecked," he told the mayor. "This department needs new leadership with a fresh vision for community policing." The news of the captain's resignation made headlines that evening. Some people praised him for taking responsibility, while others said it was too little, too late. But everyone agreed that it showed how seriously the incident was being taken at the highest levels. Derek watched the news coverage from his living room, feeling even more isolated. His own captain had fallen on his sword because of Derek's actions. Good people were suffering because of his moment of anger and prejudice. The woman from the courthouse, meanwhile, had remained completely silent throughout the entire controversy. Reporters had tried to identify her, but she seemed to have vanished from public view. Her lawyer had issued one brief statement saying she preferred to handle the matter through proper legal channels, but beyond that, nothing. Some community leaders had tried to make her a symbol of dignity in the face of injustice, but she wasn't seeking publicity or attention. Her silence only made Derek's behavior look worse by comparison. While he was the center of a media storm, she had maintained her privacy and composure. The city council announced they would be conducting a comprehensive review of police hiring, training, and disciplinary procedures. They also fast-tracked the search for a new police commander who could rebuild community trust and implement meaningful reforms. Derek's hearing was scheduled for the following week. His lawyer, paid for by the police union, had advised him to prepare for the worst. The video evidence was undeniable, the public pressure was intense, and the department was clearly looking to make an example of him. As Derek sat in his darkened living room watching his career and reputation crumble on the evening news, he realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. His badge hadn't given him the right to treat people badly. His authority was supposed to protect citizens, not intimidate them. But this realization had come too late. The damage was done, not just to his own life, but to his family, his colleagues, and the entire department. One moment of cruelty had created ripple effects that would take years to repair. The woman he had humiliated continued her life in dignified silence, while Derek faced the consequences of actions he could never undo. The community was demanding change, the department was in crisis, and Derek was about to learn that actions have consequences, even for those who wear badges. Tomorrow would bring his hearing, where he would finally face accountability for what he had done. But tonight, he sat alone with the weight of his choices and the knowledge that he had betrayed everything his uniform was supposed to represent. 2 weeks had passed since Captain Rodriguez announced his resignation, and the Riverside Police Department felt like a ship without a captain. Morale was at an all-time low, community trust was broken, and everyone was walking on eggshells, wondering what would happen next. Lieutenant Torres had been serving as acting commander, but everyone knew this was temporary. The city council had been working around the clock to find someone who could step into this mess and somehow fix it. They needed someone with an impeccable record, someone who could rebuild trust with the community while also earning respect from the officers. The announcement came on a Thursday morning. Mayor Patricia Gonzalez stood at the podium in City Hall, flanked by council members and community leaders. The room was packed with reporters, police officers, and concerned citizens who had been following the story. Today, I'm proud to announce that we have found an exceptional leader to guide our police department through this challenging time. The mayor began. Dr. Angela Washington will be joining us as our new police commander, effective immediately. The crowd murmured with interest as the mayor continued reading Dr. Washington's impressive credentials. She had a PhD in criminal justice from Georgetown University. She had served with distinction in police departments in Atlanta, Denver, and, most recently, as deputy chief in Portland, Oregon. Dr. Washington has specialized in community policing initiatives and has successfully transformed departments that were facing similar challenges to ours. The mayor explained. She has implemented training programs that are now used as models across the country. What made Dr. Washington's background even more impressive was her track record with troubled departments. In Atlanta, she had taken over a precinct that was dealing with corruption scandals and had completely turned around their relationship with the community. In Denver, she had developed a training program that reduced use of force incidents by 40% in just 2 years. But perhaps most importantly, Dr. Washington had a reputation for being fair but firm. Officers respected her because she had come up through the ranks and understood their challenges. Communities trusted her because she listened to their concerns and actually made changes based on their feedback. Derek heard about the new commander while sitting in his lawyer's office, going over preparation for his upcoming hearing. His attorney, Bob Peterson, was a veteran police union representative who had seen these kinds of cases before. "The timing isn't great for you," Peterson admitted, shuffling through Derek's file. "They're bringing in someone with a reform mandate. She's going to want to make an example of high-profile cases to show the community that things are changing." Derek felt his stomach drop even further. He had been hoping that maybe, with time, the controversy would die down, and he could quietly return to work with a suspension or some additional training. But a new commander meant fresh eyes on his case, and fresh determination to prove that the department was serious about change. Dr. Washington arrived in Riverside on a Sunday evening, driving herself in a modest sedan rather than arriving with fanfare. She had requested a simple transition, wanting to focus on the work rather than publicity. The local news stations were hoping for interviews, but she politely declined, saying she wanted to meet with her officers and community members. Her first day was Monday morning, and she had requested that all department personnel attend a mandatory meeting at 8 a.m. The main conference room wasn't big enough, so they had to use the gymnasium at the community center next door. Derek received notice that he was required to attend, despite being suspended. His hearing was scheduled for Wednesday, and Dr. Washington wanted to meet with all personnel before making any major decisions about pending disciplinary cases. The atmosphere in the gym that morning was tense. Nearly 100 officers, dispatchers, administrative staff, and support personnel filled the folding chairs. Everyone was curious about their new leader, but also nervous about what changes might be coming. Dr. Washington walked in at exactly 8 o'clock, wearing a crisp navy blue suit and carrying a simple leather folder. She was younger than many. People had expected, probably in her early 40s, with an air of quiet confidence that immediately commanded attention. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the room without needing a microphone. "I know this has been a difficult few weeks for all of you, and I want to start by acknowledging that." She spoke directly to the group, making eye contact with officers throughout the room. "I didn't come here to point fingers or assign blame. I came here to help us move forward together. But moving forward means being honest about where we are and what needs to change. Dr. Washington talked about her vision for community policing, about building bridges between officers and the neighborhoods they serve. She spoke about the importance of accountability, not as punishment, but as a way to maintain the public trust that makes effective policing possible. Every single person in this room took an oath to protect and serve, she continued. That oath doesn't just apply to the easy situations or the people who look like us or think like us. It applies to everyone, every time, without exception. Several officers nodded in agreement. Others looked uncomfortable, probably wondering if she was talking directly about Derek's situation without mentioning him by name. "I'll be scheduling one-on-one meetings with each of you over the next few weeks," Dr. Washington announced. "I want to hear your perspectives, your concerns, and your ideas for how we can better serve our community. Change doesn't happen from the top down. It happens when everyone is committed to doing better." After the general meeting, Dr. Washington spent the rest of her first day touring the facility, meeting with supervisors and reviewing ongoing cases. She had requested files on all pending disciplinary matters, including Derek's case, which was prominently placed on her desk. That evening, she attended a community meeting at the local community center. Nearly 200 residents showed up, many of them still angry about the courthouse incident and skeptical about whether anything would really change. Dr. Washington listened carefully as person after person shared their experiences with the police department. Some stories were about minor inconveniences, but others described serious incidents of disrespect and unfair treatment. She took notes, asked follow-up questions, and most importantly, she didn't make excuses or defend behaviors that were clearly wrong. "I can't undo what has happened in the past," she told the crowd, "but I can promise you that we will do better going forward. And I can promise you that officers who don't meet our standards will be held accountable." When someone specifically asked about Derek's case, Dr. Washington was careful with her response. "I cannot discuss ongoing disciplinary matters in detail, but I can tell you that every case will be handled fairly, thoroughly, and in accordance with our policies and community values." Derek watched the news coverage of the community meeting from his living room, feeling more isolated than ever. Dr. Washington seemed like everything he wasn't: thoughtful, respectful, committed to fairness. The contrast between her professional demeanor and his courthouse behavior was stark and embarrassing. His hearing was now just 2 days away. Derek would finally have to face the consequences of his actions, and he would be facing them in front of someone who clearly took police accountability seriously. The woman who would determine his fate had built her entire career on the principle that police officers must earn and maintain community trust through their actions. As Derek tried to sleep that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that his world was about to change forever. In less than 48 hours, he would walk into that hearing room and face the most important moment of his career. What he didn't know was that the moment would be far more shocking than anything he could imagine. Wednesday morning arrived gray and cold, matching Derek's mood perfectly. He had barely slept the night before, running through different scenarios in his head about how the hearing might go. His wife Carmen had made him breakfast, but he could only manage a few bites before his nervous stomach rebelled. "Whatever happens today, we'll get through it," Carmen said, squeezing his hand across the kitchen table. "The kids and I love you no matter what." Derek nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change forever. He put on his best suit, the same one he had worn to his police academy graduation ceremony 10 years ago. Back then he had felt so proud, so ready to serve and protect. Now that same suit felt like armor he was wearing into battle. The hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the main conference room at police headquarters. Derek arrived 30 minutes early, accompanied by his union representative, Bob Peterson. They sat in Peterson's car for a few minutes, going over last-minute strategy. "Remember, be respectful, take responsibility for your actions, and express genuine remorse," Peterson advised. "Dr. Washington has a reputation for being fair, but she also doesn't tolerate officers who try to make excuses or blame others." Derek walked into the building through the back entrance, avoiding the small group of protesters who had gathered out front. Even 3 weeks later, some community members were still demanding justice. Their chance of accountability now followed him through the parking lot. Inside the conference room, several people were already seated around the large wooden table. There was Captain Torres, who was still serving as acting supervisor. Detective E. Martinez from Internal Affairs was there with a thick file folder. A representative from the city's Human Resources Department sat quietly in the corner, taking notes. Derek took his seat across from the empty chair at the head of the table where Dr. Washington would sit. His hands were sweating, and he kept wiping them on his pants legs. Peterson sat beside him, organizing papers and trying to look confident. At exactly 10 o'clock, the conference room door opened. Derek looked up, expecting to see Dr. Washington. For the first time. Instead, his entire world tilted sideways. Walking through the door, wearing the same type of professional Navy suit she had worn at the courthouse, was the woman he had humiliated 3 weeks ago, the woman whose briefcase he had kicked, the woman whose papers he had scattered across the marble floor, the woman he had made that terrible comment to. Derek's mouth fell open. His face went completely white. His hands started shaking so badly that he had to grip the edge of the table to steady himself. Dr. Angela Washington walked calmly to the head of the table and took her seat. She placed her folder down, opened it deliberately, and looked directly at Derek for the first time since that day at the courthouse. "Good morning, everyone," she said in the same calm, professional voice Derek remembered from that horrible day. "Thank you all for being here. Let's begin." Derek felt like he couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of nightmare. The woman he had treated so badly, the woman he had assumed was just some nobody public defender, was now sitting across from him as his judge and jury. Peterson leaned over and whispered urgently, "Derek, do you know her? You look like you've seen a ghost." Derek couldn't respond. He just stared at Dr. Washington, waiting for her to acknowledge what had happened between them. But she was acting as if they had never met before, calmly reviewing the papers in her folder. "This hearing concerns Officer Derek Rodriguez and the incident that occurred on April 15th at the downtown courthouse," Dr. Washington began, her voice steady and official. "We're here to review the facts, consider all relevant information, and determine appropriate disciplinary action." She spoke as if she was reading about someone else's case, as if she hadn't been personally involved. Derek realized that she was handling this with complete professionalism, separating her personal experience from her official duties. Detective Martinez presented the evidence methodically. The videos were played on the conference room's large screen. Derek watched himself kick that briefcase again, heard his own cruel words, saw Dr. Washington maintaining her dignity, while he showed none. Watching those videos while sitting across from Dr. Washington was the most humiliating experience of Derek's life. Every cruel gesture, every moment of disrespect was magnified by the knowledge that his victim was now his judge. "Officer Rodriguez has been with the department for 10 years. Detective Martinez continued. "His file shows 7 previous complaints from citizens, primarily involving allegations of discourteous behavior during traffic stops and other interactions." Dr. Washington listened carefully, occasionally asking questions about the investigation process or requesting clarification about specific incidents. She never once indicated that she had any personal knowledge of Derek's behavior. When it came time for Derek to speak, he could barely find his voice. Peterson had prepared a statement for him, but suddenly all those carefully crafted words seemed completely inadequate. I want to apologize," Derek began, his voice cracking. "My behavior was completely unacceptable. There's no excuse for what I did." Dr. Washington looked at him with the same calm expression she had maintained throughout the hearing. "Officer Rodriguez, do you understand why your actions were problematic beyond just the immediate incident?" Derek struggled to answer. Because police officers are supposed to protect people, not hurt them? That's part of it," Dr. Washington replied. "But there's more. When a police officer abuses his authority, even in a small way, it damages the relationship between law enforcement and the entire community. It makes people afraid of the very officers who are supposed to help them," she continued, her voice remaining professional but carrying weight that Derek could feel in his bones. "Every person deserves to be treated with basic human dignity, regardless of their race, gender, or social status. When we fail to meet that standard, we betray the oath we took and the trust the community has placed in us. Derek wanted to say something about not knowing who she was, about how he would have acted differently if he had known she was important. But as the words formed in his mind, he realized how terrible they sounded. She shouldn't have had to be. Important for him to treat her with respect. The hearing continued for another hour. Character witnesses spoke about Derek's family situation and his years of service. Peterson argued for a suspension with mandatory training rather than termination. The union representative talked about the importance of due process and second chances. But everyone in the room could see that Dr. Washington had already made her decision. Her questions were thorough and fair, but her expression remained unchanged throughout all the arguments for leniency. Finally, she closed her folder and looked directly at Derek. Officer Rodriguez, your actions on April 15th represented a fundamental failure to understand what it means to be a police officer. You violated the constitutional rights of a citizen, you brought disgrace to this department, and you betrayed the trust that our community has placed in all of us. Derek felt tears starting to form in his eyes. He knew what was coming next. Effective immediately, your employment with the Riverside Police Department is terminated, Dr. Washington announced. You will surrender all department property and your certification will be forwarded to the State Board for review. The room was silent except for the sound of Derek's shaky breathing. Peterson put a hand on his shoulder, but Derek barely felt it. Dr. Washington stood up, gathering her papers. This concludes the hearing. Officer Rodriguez, I hope you use this experience to reflect on the kind of person you want to be going forward. As she walked toward the door, Derek finally found his voice. Dr. Washington, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. She paused at the door and looked back at him. For just a moment, her professional mask slipped, and Derek saw something that might have been sadness in her eyes. I believe you are sorry, Officer Rodriguez, she said quietly. I hope that's enough to help you become better. Then she was gone, leaving Derek to face the reality of what his moment of cruelty had cost him. His career was over, his reputation was destroyed, and his family would have to rebuild their lives around his failure. But perhaps most importantly, Derek finally understood that the badge he had worn for 10 years was never about power over others. It was about service to others. And in that understanding, maybe there was still hope for redemption.